Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
All right.
So what I'm going to show you today is not really a presentation yet, but just some quick screenshots of a few of kind of the tables and the ideas and the flow to see if we focus on the objective here would be to come out the other end with some proposal for an intervention on moving people in the direction of plant-based diet that might actually be something that one could do here in Massachusetts. Probably with a little bit of funding. And I know like the Barr Foundation provides funding for things, and this could be an intriguing project. And I would want to bring people into the discussion that I know who are interested in this. There's a group in Sierra Club that's kind of doing, at least they're interested in plant-based eating. Through my Unitarian Society, there's a very active plant-based eating club that meets on a regular basis with potlucks, and they're connected to the congregation of Waltham, and they've got, I don't know, dozens, hundreds of people who are kind of trying to get on board with this. So and they also do presentations around why to, so there's a community out there that might be interested in coming together to look at doing maybe a kind of an intervention where we might really learn something that would be generalizable. It wouldn't be a real study in the sense that would take too much, but it could be putting together some pieces of an intervention based in some theory and experience that might prove attractive. So that is the concept. Let me bring a share screen and just show you some of the pieces. So the alternative, as I see it, I mean, this could be a so-called expert series where we really try to reach out to people who are interested in plant-based diets, kind of a working session, or it could just be something I would just shop around, kind of one-on-one with folks out there who might be interested in joining it. So it could go, either way. I think I'll probably kind of do something with it, but it doesn't have to be in this context necessarily, unless you guys feel like there's enough attractive to folks to engage them as we move along. So this would be designing an intervention to promote climate-friendly diet. And so I would start off with the really big picture. Where does diet fit into all the other lifestyle changes? And you've seen some of this stuff before. You guys remember these are the carbon footprints for various countries, and it just shows where food fits in. Canada's pretty much like us to some extent. So the idea here is just give a context. This is where food fits in, not as important as housing and transport in this country, but still of some significance. And then I do that comparison where Indonesia is at compared to us. And these are things you've seen before. And then this is specifically the US, where it breaks it down about 14%. And then
Roger, do you want comments now or?
yeah, sure. Yeah,
Yeah,
well,
just
here's the well, you can. This is really just a big picture. These are
okay.
not necessarily slides I'm going to use. So if it's a little piece of a little slide, maybe not. But if it's about the big picture and like, well,
No, no, not about the big picture. Go ahead.
okay, Ed.
Yeah, a big picture question. I think it's a big picture question is what is the range of possible improvement that we're dealing with? We're only 14%. We go down to 12% or 11% or 10%. What's the
Yeah, well,
range? We're going down
yeah,
to zero.
that needs to be in here. Let me put this up here, and I have some stuff that starts to get at that, but not as. And that's a good question, and I think I could probably find some stuff that relates to that.
And then the
And
other
this
bigger
is
picture question is psychologically, as I was reading the article in Time this morning on the effect of heat and how many people are going to die around the world, as a motivator to saying, do anything you can to go ahead and affect climate change, because this is what's going to happen if we don't.
here.
So it's a
Yeah,
bigger picture. So that's a sort of a new piece of information that has not been generally published, but it would be interesting to have that as a motivator. How do you motivate people to do this? And then you get down to what type of pancakes you're going to cook.
right. But as you'll see, as it turns out, I mean that kind of motivation takes you a little ways, and it actually turns out that uh, uh, telling people about the animal welfare issues is pretty potent
Okay.
compared to some things that I never would have expected that. Arnie.
Yeah, I'll go back to a couple of things, this slide and the couple of before. I think I have seen fairly recently estimates that show if you take food production in its entirety, you know, full life cycle, including, you know, generation of fertilizer and all of it's more than 14%, that it's more like
Okay.
a quarter. I don't know if any other people have, if that resonates with anybody else, but
So this might be old stuff that's coming. I'll dig a little deeper into both of those things.
Betty, I've seen.
Yeah, along that line, I was thinking like if you reduce meat, then you reduce people cutting down forests in various places to make more cattle pasture. So it seems to me that if you're really looking in depth, it probably comes out to more than 14%, I would think.
Okay. I
What the
haven't dug in. Yeah, it's good.
effects are.
Yeah.
And I guess
this is very helpful.
Yeah, and I'll see if I can find the reference. But the other thing I was in the slide you're displaying now, I find surprising in some ways. I wouldn't have expected, I don't know why, I wouldn't have expected the carbon footprint of food to vary as much as it does as a function of household income.
Yeah.
I mean, does anybody else find that surprising? I mean, I thought that higher income folks had more knowledge about what was, you know, a healthy diet, and, you know, tended not to consume as many calories. And so I don't know. I mean, so I just found that surprising. Betty?
Yeah. So to go again, to follow on a little bit, I mean, does it really take a lot more CO2 to grow fresh carrots and vegetables and things like that than it does to make lots of really highly processed foods?
Yeah.
Because I would expect that to be part of the difference between income level. And so it's not clear to me how that would actually play out.
Well, some of that, just a reminder. I mean, a lot of the, well, a substantial portion of this is driven by red meat and dairy, and you know, folks who don't have a lot of money. I mean, they eat a lot of meat, but they probably are buying chicken and stuff that's less expensive. So there is an income piece here that plays a partial role, but these other things could be important too. Ed,
Be nice to compare this to what the diet is of people at different income levels. In other words, whether it's low meat, high meat, less vegetables, more dairy, and have that be a parallel chart on the right side of the graph. That would be interesting to see, because then that might explain Betty's just comment of saying maybe or your comment saying richer people eat more meat.
Yeah, so. Very helpful stuff, and I'm able to find stuff in here. So this was just an indication of what can be accomplished in terms of tons per year if you go vegan or vegetarian, and an indication that folks who on that end of the scale also tend to do a little bit less of some of the other bad stuff like transportation. I don't know that I would include this, but it just it you know, kind of breaks it down in terms of tons of CO2 per year, the possibility of cutting that in half if you make some substantial changes in diet, which is a big change here, down a third, and some modest changes in transportation. This must be, you know, a lot of these things don't tell you whether it's U.S. or this must be global, because housing, which is down here, is so tiny, and in the U.S., it's obviously a lot more substantial than that. So I expect this is potentially worldwide on some level. I clarified.
But I like this slide. I think it would be useful for people to see this.
Yeah.
And if you could get it for the US, that would be even more useful.
And especially the comparison in diets, because that's what your focus is. I mean, that's
Right,
very
exactly.
dramatic.
Yeah, yeah. We're not trying to make everybody a vegan, but at least a vegetarian. Right. So this I just pulled this off. Just found this on a UN website. Surface temperature responding to greenhouse gas emissions from future food consumption under kind of business as usual, but based on each of the the IPCC scenarios. I wouldn't want to get into depth in this slide, but the idea of kind of showing what the notion is that potentially, at least under one scenario, by 2100, there is the potential for reducing greenhouse gases. I'm trying to look what it's the global mean surface temperature by bringing the temperature down by almost 1 degree centigrade just by dealing with food issues globally by 2100, or by a half a degree by 2050. So I don't know whether this may be just too complex to show here. I might just say something about it. I think what you guys are talking about is a good question of like, well, how much cutting of what sort of things within the food would make how much difference? I think that's a question people have. This slide is probably not the way to do it, but there's probably some data out there where I could get into that a little bit more. And then we have the comparison of the different types of food and their contribution to greenhouse gases. And this is in kilograms of greenhouse gases per kilogram of the particular food. And I think this is very helpful. And getting down more into the weeds a little bit, and you can see where beef and lamb, shellfish are way up there. I guess I don't know that much about growing shellfish and why this is so carbon intensive. And then cheese, of all the dairy products, is a really big one. And then obviously go down here, poultry, pork, and fish, very much less. If you're talking about the need not to go vegetarian, there are lots of other protein options. And of course, and my favorite tofu is way down here. And then it's also per 100 grams of protein, because part of the concept is, you're eating, your meat is a big protein source. You need to replace it with something else. If you're going to replace your protein, what are you going to replace it with that's less carbon intensive? And then you kind of get a sense. It's very, very similar in terms of how it flows. But it gives you an idea that it is possible to get the protein you need from other sources and capitalize on the CO2 reduction that's possible. And then this is per calories. And I'm not sure, I guess that's, I have to conceptualize why that might be important, but they had all three there. And again, tofu comes out looking very good, I have to say. But lamb and fish and shellfish, and the shellfish thing, we'll learn more about shellfish and what that's about if it seems important. So those comparisons at least give people an idea of where we're going with this. And then, so what are people doing with meat consumption in the U.S.? There's a nice study, and I just pulled this graph out just to show something. I would never show, I probably just show this by itself, but there is some data out there. This is the U.S. and the frequency of red meat. There actually are 21% of people who said not at all. And lots of people don't eat seafood. And most people are eating 2 to 4 times a week red meat, and so 4% are eating more than once a day having their red meat. So probably a lot of that very, and that's probably some of that's processed. So we have processed and red meat and poultry. So just to give an idea, this could be translated into a graph or something that give people a sense of where we're at. And then there are the other thing. I guess I missed a slide here. Let's see if I did. No. Well, because seafood. There is another slide I missed here. There is a slide about how many people are trying to cut down on intake of red meat, and it turns out to be something about 20 or 25%. They say that they're trying to cut down on red meat. And so then they ask the question of why are you, for this smaller group that say they're trying to do this, what are the reasons that they're trying to reduce red meat in their diet? And you see, like for the vast majority, cost is big, health is big, and this is by income. So, and then, they don't say anything about what the other is. I'd be curious, but environment is very low on here. But health and cost are really the big reasons. And I was surprised at least that there are that many people saying that they're trying to cut red meat out of their diet, but most of them not for environmental reasons. And then for reasons that people, or for the vast number of people, all the rest of the folks, why aren't they trying to cut red meat out of their diet? And you can see that they say, well, it's the healthy thing to do. A meal is not complete, and it's boring if I don't have red meat. And I don't know what this too expensive doesn't make sense. It's expensive to get other things, I guess, and it's not. If you have a meal without red meat, it's not filling. They just don't like meals, and they're not big vegetable eaters, and they don't know how to cook. So I think that's a little bit interesting. Give a flavor where the population is at. Thinking about this. So let me stop here. So that would be kind of this intro piece, kind of framing it in terms of the context of other behaviors, and then I would try to make it fairly compact, but get at each of these key issues and maybe address some of your questions about how much difference can it make. I think that's a really good question. Does that sort of work as a first piece in big picture sense? Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
I think you're saying.
I think it does. I mean, it may have more, depending on how much else there is in the presentation and if George and your presentation are together. But I think that was a real interesting introduction.
Okay.
To the impact of yeah.
Ed?
Yeah, one thing you might add along the line of what picking up on Betty's earlier comment is that what is the impact of improving, not using carbon-based fertilizers, but doing soil conditioning to grow your vegetables as opposed to something else? And what's the impact of removing those type of fertilizers and just throwing natural fertilizers, or doing some other soil reconditioning effort or agricultural technique which reduces the need for fertilizers? That might have a bigger impact on the vegetable side.
So I mean, this is a good question. The notion of like what are the components? I jump right into looking at the various meats and vegetables and their contributions, but I don't talk about the pathway of what are the different ways in which this is happening. That could be a piece in there to know to what extent this is strictly related to raising beef, and as I don't know what Betty or Amy was saying, they're taking it all the way back to the forest being cut down. How do they measure that carbon footprint? And the carbon footprint of vegetables and fruits and other things, which is not insubstantial, given the whole agricultural process. And rice is actually a big contributor of methane in terms of how it grows. I probably would want to at least, have a slide that kind of addresses those issues to the extent I could. Amy.
So I like it a lot. I find it really interesting, and I'm sort of jumping ahead. Just the slide that showed the reasons why people don't want to eat red meat, or don't want to change. It seems like, you could, and you may already have worked on this, but gearing your interventions to what their obstacles are, their objectives are. I was thinking, boy, if they belong to a church where people are bringing delicious vegetarian meals to a potluck. Anyway, just different.
And this would all be kind of taken into account. So the notion is that then we switch gears. Okay, Arnie, you have your hand up.
Yeah, two things, and I'm forgetting what they were. I don't know if I mentioned this, but Kevin sent a nice review of a book he read a couple of weeks ago. Called How the World Really Works, that I was interested enough that I got the book and read it. And one of the things it does have is a comparison between the yield of different types of foods per acre with and without synthetic fertilizers. And
Okay.
so that may be some, I'm sure there's other sources for that itself as well, but at least according to this book, it's pretty dramatic. I mean, in terms of the yield, although, you know, the application, you know, it seems to be over applying these, you know, these synthetic fertilizers. The other thing, I don't know where this would fit in, but it seems to me that that the whole couple 3 years ago, I was really excited, and I think other people are excited about the plant-based meat substitutes, Beyond Meat, and that type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And that seems to have turned into a bust. And I don't know why, but I don't know, and I don't know how that would fit into this discussion. But it was an attempt to, I think, an attempt to reduce red meat consumption. And it seems, at least from what I have been reading, it seems to have not panned out.
At least it's not taking off wildly quickly. Amy?
Yeah, I have two questions about that. I mean, one is, you know, are people just not that interested in it? You like meat, or you like, you know, all whole food alternatives. And the other is, I'm wondering about the health impacts of that, because we're learning so much about the emulsifiers and, you know, all the stuff that goes into processed foods. That's a pretty highly processed food if it actually is not healthy to eat it.
Right. Yeah, I hadn't. So, Arnie, what's your source of info on that? Your stock's going down, and
it's just not. It's just not. You know, at McDonald's and Burger King. I don't know if any of you have ever been to one of those, but they did try out, you know, plant-based burgers, and then they stopped doing it. We, you know, bought, you know, some, I forget, there were basically two brands, Beyond, you know, Beyond Burger, Beyond Meat. We had purchased some of that, and we're just, you know, I mean, in terms of taste, it didn't taste much better or different than a veggie burger. And the amount of packaging that, I don't know if you've ever seen this stuff in the grocery store, but it's just
loads of plastic.
It's just plastic. Each burger is separately wrapped.
Okay, good point. Betty?
Yeah, my comment follows kind of along the lines of what Amy was saying, is that, you know, I thought it was pretty interesting for a while, and, you know, I was thinking about trying it, and I think I must have had it someplace when I was out at a meal. But then I kept reading things about, you know, how this is a really highly processed thing, and it's actually maybe not all that great for you. And so I was very definitely put off, and haven't been inclined to do that, though I have been cutting out red meat like mad, and meat in general I've been reducing quite a lot. I had one other thought, just Roger, this for as an overall comment.
Yeah.
On one of your slides, you had something about people not knowing how to cook.
Right.
And as I try and change the way I eat, I find that's a real thing.
Yeah. Okay.
And so I think it would be a lot of fun and maybe engage people if in the course of your slides and stuff, periodically you threw in a good recipe.
Okay.
People would think that was kind of fun or interesting, or actually really helpful. I, for one, would find it helpful.
Okay.
I can contribute a lot.
Yeah. I really don't know how to cook with a lot of, you know, lentils and things, other kinds of proteins, plant proteins.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. Good points. Okay, so the concept here, and then here's where I need feedback. I mean, you know, the way one could probably do an entire deep dialogue if we addressed all of the questions in detail that you have all brought up at this point in time and dove into fertilizer and organic food production, what's happening in the rest of the world, what's happening in the U.S. That could go in that direction. I mean, that's my thought is it's more attractive to sort of, you know, get this focused, keep it focused in the U.S., something that we can do, but giving it, you know, a bit of that context. So along those lines, and I also, as opposed to just jumping to, well, let's figure out what kind of intervention to do. I said, hey, I think this intervention should be based in theory, and so let's quickly do a very rapid review of some of the what we know about theories about changing behavior, which I don't want to spend a huge amount of time on. But what and this again, I wouldn't be showing slides this complicated. I might try to reduce this to, you know, one or two slides where I just list and talk a bit about some of the theoretical concepts that people have been working on and trying to test out, just to give people what I'm trying to get across here is behavior is determined by a lot of different things. It's you know, and we're still in a place where we're trying to learn how that all works and how to form the best interventions. But the main take-home message is not to learn each one of these things, but like, wow, you know, of course, yes, there are all kinds of things going on here. So this comes from a pro-environmental behavior review that I think George turned me on to. And it talks about the different determinants, and it start with knowledge, risk perception, problem, how much you're aware that this is a problem in the environment, how much you feel like you're responsible for it. Are you feeling personally, ethically responsible? What emotions does this bring up for you? What are your adscriptive norms, which are that's the extent to which people believe that others are engaging in the behavior, whether they are or not. You think they are. And injunctive norms, the extent to which people believe a behavior is widespread or something. I don't know. So that you know, that would be one piece of it. And then I probably wouldn't, you know, this model, as you said, is very complex because it tries to show some of the temporal relations and the interactions. I think I would probably just take what are the determinants of behavior, and just kind of go through them and list them and talk about them, and not try to sort of say, well, you could put this into a fancy model and you can have things starting here and there. Well, let's not go there. Let's just talk about there are many determinants of behavior you need to be thinking about when you're designing an intervention. Arnie.
Yeah, I just was thinking back when you showed that previous slide, and maybe it applies to this slide too, to the slide you showed earlier for the reasons that folks who are trying to reduce their red meat consumption, what are their reasons for doing it? And if I remember right, you know, high on that list was cost, and then there was health, I think was in there. But on near the top, but environment was
very low.
Well, down the list.
Right. Yeah. But among, you know, so this is where, I mean, the question comes, where are you going to focus your intervention? You know, there are probably plenty of people in that small group who are for environment. Obviously, in our movement, these are the people that you might start with. Clearly, you know, we could find out what proportion of folks have really made a lot of progress on plant-based eating within our global movement at ECA and, you know, throughout Massachusetts for people who do care about environment. So in that case, these things would apply to them, potentially more so than to the general population. So you got to be thinking about who, you know, that survey was of the general population. Things might be different if we look at environmentalists. Amy.
I'm thinking with this slide, and I'm agreeing with what you just said, that if you went through this with an example, you know, like red meat or something, just, you know, something where you could describe how this would be how you'd see this operating in real life.
Well, that's what we get to at the end. The idea of this is to start the process at the end of brainstorming. What factors might we think are most important in an intervention? And I'm going to put my view out, like what they might be, and what would that intervention look like if you think those factors are important. And then it would be, up to the audience. Those of you who are really interested in doing this, let's get together and talk some more about it and see if we can design an intervention.
I'm just
that make
remembering
sense?
now that George said he had to leave at 2.
Uh,
I'm wondering,
We
George,
could take a break and jump in with George and I could finish up.
yeah,
Okay.
if that's okay. This is
Yeah,
good.
mine's very quick, but this actually is a great place to segue in.
Yeah.
You can even leave that up.
Oh.
Well, okay, so I'll share screen. But so in thinking about this stuff with Roger, one of the things, and then going back and looking kind of across literature, one of the things that I wasn't finding a lot about is how are people's previous experience and where they live and other factors that those determinants point to, how does that allow us to kind of focus ideas and questions on behavior change for that type of a person? So that's where I was coming up with the climate personalities piece, which I have 10 different types now. And I'll share my screen. So can everybody see that at this point?
Kind of small,
Okay.
a little bit.
Let me do this. So the big people in this are the Yale climate folks, and they've come up with, and they've had it for 14 or 15, actually 16 years, where they have 6 different types of really emotions almost about climate change. And they go out and they do surveys every year, and that's one of the things that I sent to Arnie, which shows how feelings about climate have changed over the past 10 or 15 years. And they get down into alarmed, concerned, cautious, disengaged, doubtful, and dismissive, which range from folks that are very aware of climate change. They're very alarmed about it, but they don't know what to do about it. That's the alarmed. All the way to dismissive, which are folks that also probably believe in, Jewish space lasers and a few other things like that, and the problems that vaccines give you. But they don't break it down much beyond that. And then one of the things that Arnie noted when we looked at how these results map to both over time. So alarmed goes down. Alarmed actually increases, concerned increases. There are a few other ones that change, but there is a trend toward people understanding it. Anyway, make a long story short, since I want to do this quickly, I decided that one thing that would be interesting to see is if we could take those sorts of ideas that are just about what are the feelings, and then subdivide those or figure out where those feelings kind of rooted. And so I came up with 10, and it's growing of ideas for different people. So came up with these names: concerned realist, eco-optimist. Skeptical conservative is the person who really doesn't believe in climate change. Nature enthusiast. So this is somebody who would fall into the concerned bucket in the Yale piece, but they're concerned for a different reason than, for example, the eco-optimist, who is concerned but also has a different view. They're more along the ideas that we can fix this and we can do it with technology and things like that. Urban pragmatist, person that lives in a city, maybe doesn't interact with nature a lot, but still enjoys green spaces. And then getting into things like policy advocate and social justice advocate, who are concerned about interacting with government and see government as a means and need to be involved. And then the social justice advocate is one that believes in government being involved, but also is very concerned about the social environmental effects. And then things like the most recent one, which I don't have a good name for yet, but it's kind of the social science indifference. So they just don't pay attention to the science, and so they're quite easily swayed. Ed.
Yeah, makes me think of a government policy of promoting farmers markets where you eat local and you eat it grown on a lot of organic farming locally, and have it be, sometimes they're expensive, but often you can walk to them in an urban area. But that's a government policy of promoting those types of things to eat differently. Just a thought.
Yeah, I mean, a person that engages in that probably would be, so the urban pragmatist would be the person that would be, at least that act would be kind of an urban pragmatist act. The other point that I didn't mention is that a lot of these traits or personalities are going within the same person. So you can be a nature enthusiast and an urban pragmatist. And I think Amy actually responded when I first put this out that she thought she was 4 or 5 different things. Anyway, Amy?
Yeah, I'm just thinking that you said something right before you started this that got me thinking along these lines, but I'm not sure if you meant it this way. Just, you said something about sort of what's behind these positions, and it's very focused on the individual, and I feel like there's a social context to, I mean, some of it is individual temperament or what your parents believed when you were growing up, but that's social context too, sort of, what do the people around you care about? What's their orientation? How much are they paying attention to the news? How, sort of the skepticism or the respect for science of the people around you. And I don't know if that's useful to use, but it just occurred to me that, that's part of what feeds into people's positions.
Yeah, so it basically, on all of these things, I have the experiences, and the way I worked it out was I tried to think of people that I knew, and if I were talking with them, what would they say, what their experiences were, and then I would have, when I'm trying to influence them or talking to them about a particular behavior, I came up with some follow-up questions. So just as an example, a concerned realist is something that I think a lot of us are, at least in part. We believe in science. We're somewhat cautious about solutions, but we want, achievable things. And so in talking to somebody who has a fair amount of concerned realist in them, you do things like ask questions about how much can you change and what would you like to change in support of climate action. And it may be that you work them from, as Roger points out, reducing beef is one of the kind of the low-hanging fruit on a lot of things. And then once they start to do that, you might be able to move them kind of up the pathway to electrification and EV and a lot of economic aspects, and then maybe even push them into areas where they are policy advocates and things like that. So I'm just trying to grapple with this initially because one of the things I didn't find in a lot of the literature was ideas about what has driven people into their current status of things like being alarmed versus concerned and cautious. And it seems like if you know what those, if you have a sense of what those previous experiences were, including the social determinants, that your ability to address those and actually get meaningful change is probably increased. So I know I've got to get with Roger some more and brainstorm some of this to see where it might head. But it'd be interesting, for example, in a breakout session, you know, you could almost tell, you might be able to tell who is more of a nature loving person versus somebody who's more a pragmatic type person and all that kind of stuff. So anyway, it's where I'm sitting. I thought I'd get this out there and let people chew on it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, you make me think
Ed?
you should have a type of a Myers-Briggs exam for people who are environmentalists and have them be able to click on it and take it after the
Yeah.
session.
Yes. I actually started the questions at the end of that document there. I have a bunch of questions. There are too many. But I also wrote some programs that allow you to take those questions and then it actually characterizes you as to whether or not you're in which of these things you're in and what percentage of those things you're in. So very much a Myers-Briggs thing. So Betty?
Right. So in terms of working with this, you are expanding your categories, and I can see that could continue indefinitely. But I see a problem in that you may have spun these out, but I for one will not remember them. And it seems to me that if you want to use this practically as you talk to people or have a framework that you can use when you're meeting and talking with people, it needs to be fewer rather than more. For the simple reason that the person, I, for one, will not remember all this. I might remember 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 categories, but I'm not going to remember 10 or 12.
So I
So
kind of anticipated that.
Yeah.
I don't know if people can see that. Maybe I can make it bigger. So we can actually divide it into 2 or 3, sorry, 3. They're the full believers, and they're the folks that are full believers and really are active. They want to do something. And so those are the nature enthusiast, the policy advocate, et cetera. And then they're full believers who are supportive. And they divide down into things like the resilient survivor and concerned realist. So if one thinks about it in just 3 categories, full believer, undecided, and then the skeptics, then break down the full believers into folks that want to move ahead, they want to do something. Maybe what they decide to do differs, but they're still very much wanting to be engaged and do stuff. The supportive folks, they may make a few changes, but they're not going to be leading the vanguard of it. And so you would approach those folks probably a little bit differently. You may try to get them involved in, reducing beef, in taking one less plane flight, stuff like that. And then the other 2 major categories, undecideds and skeptics. The undecided, I think it's like the folks that are going into the voting booth, not yet knowing how to vote. They're actually a big target that we could use and go after. They basically don't know what the story is, and if we can tell the story, like what Roger was talking about in the beginning of his thing, that these are the problems that we're facing, and once they get more educated, they'll move into, hopefully, supportive and action folks. Roger.
Hey, Betty, you had your hand up.
Betty, you're on mute.
I already made my comment and I've taken my hand down. At least I
Okay.
thought. Yeah.
No, I see. Okay. Yeah, so a couple of things. I mean, I think that to the extent that this is really aimed at one-on-one interactions with people, I think that, I mean, there is this technique that we've discussed, George, motivational interviewing, which to some extent is really aimed at figuring out, letting the person tell you where they can go, want to go, how they want to go, what they want to do, and you really are kind of a sounding board. So they would, in the process of that conversation, sort themselves. You would learn about where they're going and what's happening. You don't necessarily have to walk into the conversation with a defined, like you're a particular type of person, so I'm going to do this thing first. You
Right.
begin the conversation with questions and unpacking where they're coming from. The second piece, I mean, I think some of these things you're proposing are, they're determinants of behavior that could be added to the list of the ones that we already have and potentially could be useful in interventions. But for that, you're looking at large groups of people who are in a relatively similar place and looking at what might move them. And you're typically not going to have a room full of any one of these personality types. This is really made more for one-on-one engagement, I think. And the last thing is the piece about alarmed and aware, et cetera. That does kind of intersect with the pre-contemplative, contemplative preparation, action kind of framework that we have as part of the health behavior piece. It's a little bit, at least gives you a little bit of a flavor of that, although it says more about maybe what's going on behind the scenes to get them to that place. So there's some connections here between determinants and the pre-contemplation stuff that I think are worthy of exploration.
Yep, absolutely. Arnie.
Yeah. So I keep coming back to and trying to tie in my own mind that this, I think what, Dr. Duhaime told us and what we've seen in our own community initiatives, and I'm sort of curious about Mass Save and who takes advantage of the incentives from Mass Save. And the discussion Roger just walked us through on diet and reducing meat consumption, to a certain degree, they have one, area of commonality in that environmental benefit is never the top of the list. It's always somewhere down in the middle or the lower part. It seems to always be a financial benefit or a health benefit. And oh yeah, it's good for the environment as well. And I think that's what we've been being told. I was trying to tie that together with the results of the survey that you pointed us to, George, that looked at these different categories across nations, where to my surprise, the number of percent of folks who were alarmed in the lower income, South American, African nations was much higher than those in, the higher income European and North American countries. And I'm just wondering, whether, it's in some sense, I don't know how to put it, easier for people in South America or Africa to be alarmed because they're not being asked to do anything. I mean, they haven't caused the problem to begin with. what they need is for people in the higher income countries to take action. And conversely, maybe the reason that folks in the higher income nations, are, at least express less alarm is because if they did express alarm, that would mean they'd have to make some, personal behavior change, and they don't want to do it. So not to be too cynical, but I mean, that's where all of this thing seems to tie together in a way to me. And I don't know how other people feel about that, or if I've made if that point is clear or not. But it also ties into what I think we were hearing from Dr. Duhane, that, she said at the end of the day, people from an evolutionary perspective are motivated by what benefits them in the here and now.
Yeah. Ed?
I come away, I want to get out of this as an individual, since it's focused on individual behavior to a great extent. And then I look at it as our objective is, what do we want people to take away from this? And if you give a presentation as to briefly some of the issues, and then those issues are ones which you then have people think about in a breakout session and say, what would I do? What would motivate me to try one of these initiatives? And I thought the idea of putting in a recipe is a very pragmatic idea. Where someone says, I've tried this, I've done this before, it's worth a try, and get them on the road to trying something. It may be joining a group that focuses on soils improvement in agriculture, or promoting a local farmers market, which doesn't involve all the transportation, carbon, or it will involve transportation. It doesn't involve all the industrial farming aspects of things. So I just think that what are the things you're trying to convince people to do, or at least try, or put some thought into. But give them some ammunition, then have a breakout session, then come back and give them further suggestions that they hadn't even thought of.
Okay. I've got to bail.
Okay.
But
this is great.
Yeah, so it's just, like I said, it's just very, very early. So hit me with a lot of questions about this stuff, and I'll talk with Roger on just the whole behavior piece and where this fits in.
Yeah.
So
we should get together, see where we have some connections here.
Yeah, no, that'd be great. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, George.
Thank you.
George.
Take care. Bye.
All right. So, want to jump back in and try to finish up? It shouldn't take very long, actually, hopefully. So let me go ahead and share screen again.
I think it's some real possibility. I like what they're doing, and the question is, what's the hook for people?
We're covering a lot of ground and really trying to pull it together in a way that's going to be useful for people, I think. And it's a challenge. Turns out not to be so simple as we might have thought. Okay, so this is where we were here, looking at determinants of pro-environmental behavior, and then, there are a lot of, obviously, I would have kind of examples of these things and try to put it together in a graphic that people could kind of manage and just appreciate. Like, look, a lot of moving parts here, and each one of these could be a place where you could leverage an intervention if you understood what was going on. That would be the takeaway, not a deep dive into this. And I do think this is a pretty powerful way to look at populations, and where you really do need to do stuff that's quite different in terms of an intervention. So I like it's pretty simple. Obviously, people who are already starting to try recipes, and have tried a couple of things and haven't had a lot of success, but are looking for more. That's a very different group than somebody who said, I hadn't even thought about, cutting meat out of my diet. You want to, people who are in contemplation, you got a place to start. They're open to it and they're ready. A lot of those folks, but you got to really begin at the beginning and work on motivation. So I think I probably would have some piece related to this as part of that. So then what I would jump into was like, okay, well, this is all great. We have all these various kinds of theories that we might need to take into account as we design an intervention. What are the choices of interventions that we have that might reflect some of these or where they might come into play? And again, I wouldn't show this slide, but this is where I would get some of the data. It's a nice summary of the different kinds of interventions of information provision, pretty basic, but many different types of information that you can choose to describe. People talk about the main thing that's going to get your neighbors to get a heat pump is to start talking about everybody else in the neighborhood has a heat pump. Why don't you? So the norm communication could be a big piece of that if that's important and relevant. And then there's the environmental benefits. In the case of the food thing, there's also the animal welfare piece. Turns out to be somewhat persuasive to some people, including me, actually. So then there's the commitment piece. The idea is the intervention is to move people to the place where they make a commitment. It's a little bit like going door to door knocking for when you're trying to get people to go to vote. What they tell you is to ask them, do you have a plan? And if they say, well, I'm not sure. Well, let's think about what your plan might be. And they articulate a plan and say, well, yeah, I guess I could go in the morning before I go to work. And where is the play? Okay, I know where I park there. And once they say that, the likelihood they're actually going to do it increases. So part of the intervention is to move people towards making a statement and a commitment. And there's some data to suggest that could be effective in some cases. Then giving people feedback along the way. Okay, I see you went to Whole Foods and you bought some tofu. Great job. That's really a good start, guys. What did you do with the tofu? You fed it to the cat. Well, no, that's not really what you want to do. So feedback can be helpful. Then obviously in incentives, rewards and penalties, and we're probably, that's where we're there with heat pumps, where at least the decision among mass aid people is people need to have big incentives in order to actually jump in to do this because it's so expensive. And then there's the choice architecture, and that would be, putting tofu next to the hamburger in the meat case, reorganizing your refrigerator to put keep the meat in the back and put the tofu in the front. So these are things for which there is data, and I would mix this. These are the ones that I had coming out of the health behavior field, and they're similar ones. And so I would wrap this all together. I wouldn't make any big distinctions. I might say where something came from, but I would really just sort of see this as be aware that there are many types of interventions. I'll try to classify them in a way that makes sense and give some examples. And these are the kind of interventions you can think about using depending on what theoretical constructs you think are most important. And then there is some data. This is the data that comes from that same article about what kinds of interventions are most important. These percentages on this side are the likelihood that a person will actually at least make the change in behavior that you're asking for. Now, what I will say, a lot of these studies didn't have follow up and to see if people actually did anything. That was about changing intention to do it. Okay, so a lot easier. And so there's a lot of mix of stuff in here. So I don't find this a particularly compelling study. It's a meta-analysis that lumps together a lot of stuff. And I would need to put this in a little bit of context, but I would find some use for this. And this is a place where people did the social comparison's an issue, engagement. This commitment gets to 33% if people can do that. It's important. And then it does talk about different types of interventions that are more effective. Recycling, that's pretty easy. The meat intervention was still like 16% intended to cut down meat. I'd figure out what to do with these numbers, but the idea is to say there is some research out there. Let me just give you a taste of it, and let me tell you what the limitations are. This is just to remind me, here are a couple of studies that are out there that I would look at to draw on interventions for consumption of protein-rich diets. So then I would get specifically into a little more depth into the interventions that look promising for changing your diet. And then I would get into designing an intervention. And I'm just throwing out some ideas here. I just brainstorming, what's the rationale that we need to learn more about it. We need to design something new and different. There's no wheel. We do have to reinvent some things. But there's a lot of potential here these days because there's a lot of meat substitutes, and it can have an effect on and there's increasing interest, so I don't know. And then we look at theoretical determinants. We would have to sort of sort out which ones we are interested in. Most likely participants, I would say I would focus on people in contemplation, preparation, and action. And then what are some of the potential components of intervention? We might, we would look at some of the data and the results and pick and choose among some of the health things. A lot of people, we probably emphasize those, some of the climate things, some of the animal welfare things. There could be a nice informational presentation or a video that kind of puts this all together, has people discuss that and how it relates to them. Then we could seek commitment. We could set up some support groups or some way to give feedback to people. We could have visits to the grocery store. We could have cooking classes. We could, choice architecture. I'm not sure. We probably can't change how the supermarkets work, but so this would be the meat of the matter, where I would sort of really think through how this could be applied, and then make a proposal for an intervention that draws on the theoretical constructs, has a rationale for each piece of it. And then put it out there for some discussion. What do people think? This is not going to be the intervention that we're going to probably do, but the idea is like, now we can all kind of contemplate it and massage it and see where to go with it. So that is, these are the possible specific components I put in here to choose from. So, we got the potlucks, the group visits, the feedback, live group support, commitment, goal setting, educational session. So that's the package. Arnie.
Yeah, I do like the idea of sort of focusing on one practical area, maybe diet. I'm wondering, Roger, I know you have Energized Natick, right? I think. Yes.
Echo Natick.
Echo, okay. But is that part of the Energized Mass?
Yeah. We have an Energized website. Yeah.
And and we have one in our community as well. Has it, would that be a forum to try to get a group together that, I don't think I'm trying to remember if it's architected in such a way that you could try to just have a community group focused on diet through Echo Natick or Energized Stowe. But, it seems like that might be a practical way to try out some of these thoughts.
Yeah. I even see that it could be, ECA, Mothers Out Front, some of those groups, if there was an interest there. There are captive populations to some extent, and yes, the community-based groups, or maybe even the statewide groups to some extent, depending on the type of intervention and how you want to put it together. Amy.
Yeah, I'm really liking how you're streamlining the theoretical part and compressing it and making it more accessible. And then I like where you're going with, planning an intervention. I had another thought, which is eating is such a social behavior. I think, the idea of having group support is great, but people also need to, if they're changing their eating habits, have to deal with the people in their households. So that's just another factor that it could be a barrier.
It's not just one person.
Yeah, or you could change a
could be a huge barrier
household.
Right. Yeah, I totally agree with that, and that's probably something we should bring up, because it sounds, one person to change your diet, you've got 5 kids and a husband and your mother in the same house, and they all love brisket.
Right, and you're saying we're not having turkey for Thanksgiving this year.
or it's
Yeah.
you're gonna sit there while they're chomping down on the brisket with your little cube of tofu.
Roger, you need some new recipes.
It's like my,
I'm
it's
big
like
on
my,
I'm big on fake meat, I have to say. However, it's processed, and there's a lot. I don't know. There's a lot of I find very tasty stuff out there. I don't have any problem dealing with that. So the pure raw tofu is smoked tofu, baked tofu. Not much really regular tofu, but I don't mind regular tofu either. It's okay, and it does turn out. I was amazed at how well it does in terms of how low it is on the carbon release scale. Very
And
good.
it'll take any flavor. There's a lot you can do with it.
Yeah, exactly. You can marinate it, and
Mhm.
you can do it.
It's like my
So,
granddaughter. She wants to go vegetarian, and she told our daughter, her mother said, "I'll do vegetarian." He says, "But I can't give up bacon."
Well,
well, that's
it'd
okay.
still be a big
Everything.
step. Yeah, right.
Well, you're a partial vegetarian. Well, so I mean, so I'm hearing generally sort of a positive comments about the concept. It clearly is
Mhm.
in the beginning stages here, but this would be kind of like an expert sort of series kind of thing
Yeah.
where we invite people who and we could promote it as like kind of come if you're interested in learning about how to make an or even starting to develop an intervention, you're going to learn something practical here that could be of use to you.
Roger, and are you thinking about this as, I mean, is it potentially a series of presentations
I
focused on diet, or is that?
I was thinking of just one, just wrapping it all into one, hour and a half event. But you guys, I mean, clearly each part, again, what I was trying to do is make each part fairly compact, cut to the chase, and then get us to the place where we start brainstorming about an intervention and just doing all that in one flow. Um, Obviously, in particular, you could spend the whole thing about how does agricultural production affect greenhouse gases across the world, and you could do a whole show on that without a doubt. But I thought I would, focus this on getting us to the place of designing an intervention. But you thinking, Arnie, it needs more time?
No, I just brainstorming as you were doing your presentation, and feeling that this, focusing on one area like diet change seems to be, a practical way of approaching this, and potentially, spinning off a once every other month discussion. I don't know. I mean, just whether this is, a one-shot thing or something that has,
Right. Well,
more.
the idea, I mean, the idea would be that there would be a group of people who are inspired by this and come together, probably not within, it's a project of the research team, but it would take off on its own as a working group. And it might come back periodically to say, we've maybe made a step, we'd like to get some feedback or something like that. And that would be the aspirational ideal outcome, is that there are people who are kind of inspired and have some of the capacity to do it, like these folks who are already doing potlucks, folks who are kind of on the way to doing this, and have the bandwidth and to sort of make this their thing for a period of time. And then maybe see if we decide figure out what we could do on a volunteer basis without money, and what we might need funding for, and try to shape something that we actually might be able to put into the field at some point, and to some extent study. I mean, not in a totally formal sense, but try to maybe survey it before and after about where people, what people got out of it. That would be a pretty easy way to do this, and learn something that would be useful for the next version.
I mean, is
Somewhat
there
akin to Mother's Out.
any interest in, or could there be? And I mean, we have the Natural Solutions team. I mean, could there be a healthy diet team? That spun
Yeah.
off.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. I mean, it could be that, and it would be, we could decide to what extent, how embedded it is in ECA and how independent it is. We might be, I might be the the one who's kind of keeping it together, but it could become a joint project if there are others, whatever.
It seems to tie into Mothers Out Front promotion of induction stovetops too, because they've done cooking demonstrations and things like that. So
yeah.
they may have a group of people who might be interested.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So I will, I've got several things, balls in the air, of course, but I will at least kind of pursue this a little bit.
I
And,
think this really does sound like, a good basis for what might start out as, I don't even know if we would call it an expert series. Maybe we would, but what the information that you went through. I'm still unclear as to how that would be tied together with what George was presenting, but.
Oh yeah, that I don't know. I mean, George is the one. There are two ways I could see simply rolling a couple of things in here that he's got a few. I think some specific determinants that go into his personality types that fit under the category of determinants that we already have. And there could be some that don't fit that we could just add to the list. And all that would be is just, this list of potential determinants that we talk about that, and then potentially using the, alarmed, aware, et cetera. That could be, that's also a dimension. The alarmed is really just kind of a dimension of you're something of an environmentalist concerned about climate. There's a scale there. How concerned are you? So there are pieces that kind of intersect with what's going on here, but George may want to, take this in some other direction. I mean, somebody said Myers-Briggs. I don't. The question is, the only advantage of doing that kind of thing in the end is if it has some benefit in the real world. That if this typology allows you to design interventions that are specific, that work only for that typology, I kind of doubt that. I'm very skeptical that that's going to be of any value. I think it's kind of interesting, but I guess I would at least talk to George about well, where do you really think this could go? Because I do think there is this the way to communicate with people around climate. I mean, there is stuff about climate communication, things to say that we have kind of heard about, and those. But then there's also a technique called motivational interviewing. As you're trying to work with people on behavior change, there's a little bit of evidence in the medical literature, at least around people addiction and alcohol use, that this is more effective than just having general conversations. And it's kind of takes this commitment thing to another stage. It gets people to say where they're at, what they want, what they want to do. And the fact that they say it is really more important than you tell them what to do. And it's a whole technique. And clearly that's where you would tailor the whole discussion becomes tailored to where the person is at, trying to move them to the next step. And there's a whole way of doing that. So George knows about that, but I think some of that might be more where he's trying to go with. So we'll have a discussion with him.
And we're having the deep dialogue on the 18th with Dr. Duhane. Maybe that can be, maybe that can also be messaged as a springboard for something.
Yeah. And I'll be interested. I got her book. I haven't really dug into it yet. But what I'd be interested in is, again, there's her kind of theory about where the brain is at, but then she also has recommendations for, what does that mean for it's not like we can't do anything. It has recommendations that fit in. Betty.
Yep. 2 or 3 things. One is with regard to what you're doing, Roger. I would avoid packing in even more stuff because I think it's already really pretty loaded.
Yes, I agree.
Information and process and stuff. With regard to your various models, that you put up there, I think it's a case where fewer is better than more. Because
I agree. That's what that's why I would,
confusing to
I,
have, oh, well, there's this way of looking at it, and there's this way of looking, and then
I-
there's this way, and it
yeah,
just
I know. I agree.
fun,
So
you know?
that's where I think I would just have one
Yeah.
list, and I would say this came from different places, but here it is. I totally agree with you. And showing the model and how it all fits together, that takes you down a rabbit hole that is not necessary if you're designing an intervention. You just need to understand the various ways in which people are influenced, and then what does that mean for choosing how the intervention works? I mean, that's the piece to focus on. And I would try to lump together things, into categories that people could actually remember with a few examples, as opposed to lengthy lists. I think you're absolutely right.
Yeah. And as for calling it expert, expert like, or focus group maybe, or something like that,
Yeah,
your
focus group.
interest group program or something like that, maybe we could add that title into our series, because this is not expert in the same way that other
Yeah,
events.
yeah. No, it's really more of a,
Yeah,
it's a work work in
I had
progress.
something else to say, and I absolutely can't remember what it was.
That's okay.
Have to be for another
Oh, yeah,
time.
there's always email. I think.
I mean, I do think it's interesting. I definitely think that, it's not like our general membership is going to be ready to go out and create interventions. This is going to be a very specific group of people who are going to want to do this work. Though some of the thinking around it, like on changing how you think about eating or fixing food, or, that those kinds of things could be for the general.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah. Ed.
With Dr.
Yeah.
Duhane, one more thing. If you're going to look at her book, she herself told me, skip the first 4 or 5 chapters and start when you get to the behavioral stuff. Don't
Okay.
go through all the historical evolution stuff. She herself said, skip that.
All right. I'm
So,
done. That's
wise as you go through it.
That'll make it a lot easier.
And also there are several programs for people to become climate communicators. And
Right.
she has done that kind of qualification.
Yeah.
So, she does have that expertise.
Right. And that is kind of another niche that deserves its own little kind of discussion. In some ways, it's a little different from designing interventions. I think just general communication. It's related, but it deserves its own space.
I'm really
and
not
hopefully we'll
sure
get
where to
into
go
that.
with George's thinking. I mean, it's interesting. I'm just not sure how to use it.
Yeah, I'm not sure. George is he's off on the edge of the creative universe, and he goes with the flow. So that's George's creative juices at work. Ed.
Yeah, there's a restaurant in Paris that's, I guess, one of the best almost the best in the world, someone says, that's a totally vegetarian menu.
Oh,
So I'll get you the name of that.
Thank
I
you.
don't know if they have a menu as such, but when you go, they do everything fresh
sounds-
each day, depending on what's in the market. But it's extraordinarily expensive. We had a friend go there who just heard about it, and he has pictures of the dishes.
So I
So
probably
I'll send
can't
that
use
to you.
International DoorDash wouldn't help me
Right.
get a taste of that. Let's go.
Yes, you have to charter a flight to get your vegetarian.
Right. That's going to increase the carbon footprint a little
But,
bit. Right.
all locally grown.
On the subject of tofu, I used to eat it a little bit, but not a lot. But I went to China, and one of the places that they took us was this restaurant where they made an elaborate meal that looked like all different kinds of foodstuffs and so forth, and actually was all made out of tofu. And they served it with a large glass of tofu milk. And the fact of the matter is that after I had that meal, I have never wanted to eat tofu again.
Yes.
Really, it's like the last thing on earth I feel like.
That's good advice.
So, you have to be a little careful on advocacy, I guess.
Well, it's a
Everything in
little,
moderation.
you know, there was an approach to smoking cessation, which just had people smoke cigarette after cigarette after cigarette to create disgust, so they never want to smoke again.
I feel like that's what they created in this restaurant.
All right, guys, this has
All
been
right,
good.
yeah.
We'll get back, keep you
Thank
posted
you.
where we're going.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All
All right, take care, everybody.
Bye, guys.
Good luck surviving the day.
Yeah,
Yeah, good luck, everybody.
Month.
bye.